Hi Alex, welcome to Spilling Beans.
Thank you very much.
We are streaming episode 10 of Spilling Beans. Since we have been working together for almost 2 years, this is the right moment for us to celebrate the collaboration and also yes, also talk about your journey and learn from your expertise and your achievements so far working with so many coffee roasters, working with producers and across the globe and the coffee communities. Welcome on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
How did the coffee wine started? What gave the idea to create something like this?
You know how sometimes when you've told a story so many times that it almost becomes like a myth? That's how this feels a little bit. Like I've been doing this officially since 2012. So it's 14 years of doing the coffee vine, but it's not always been a subscription. It started out initially as a blog where I basically just wrote down little articles and recommendations of my favorite coffee bars that I would come across on my travels. And it was initially just, to connect cafes, like specialty coffee cafes, with coffee lovers when I still lived in Amsterdam. To be honest with you, the coffee vine evolved into a business kind of out of opportunity and necessity because I was working in a corporate job that I really hated. Yeah. I think a lot of people can echo this,
Yeah.
this resonates with a lot of people. At least in my environment, there's loads of people who are like trying to leave their corporate jobs. But I had this already in my 30s. So what happened was I was working in this job, and they had told me before I went away on holiday for Christmas that they would renew my contract. So I went away to see my family in Mexico, had a wonderful time, and then when I came back, they told me, "Oh, actually, we changed our minds. We're terminating your contract."
Oh my God.
And there was a sense like inside of me where I thought, well, this is great. um, because it was because it was basically a ticket to freedom, although I wasn't really fully ready to take the plunge and start a business, but I already had a pretty successful blog at that time. So this was in 2014. The coffee van had been kind of going already for more than a year, and it was already gaining some traction. We had built a really, or I had built a really, dedicated and enthusiastic community in Amsterdam. I was doing coffee tours around cafes, both walking and cycling. I had done workshops. I had connected with a lot of roasters already. So when the time came that they were like, "Well, we're not going to renew your contract, so this is your last month," I was actually pretty much already planning for the next step. And then the next step was going to be turning the coffee vine into a coffee subscription service, which was what I really wanted to do.
You had the vision like you want to monetize and shift from corporate to something that you can call your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I already had this feeling for a long time that I just didn't really fit into this corporate life and that I needed to pursue my own thing. What that was didn't crystallize until the coffee vine came about. I had a lot of other ideas before that, to do with events and with like, I had like an idea for a sort of second-hand clothing, not swap, but like something where people could sell and buy clothes, which of course later on other people did, very successfully. So maybe maybe that wasn't the right idea for me, but I had a lot of ideas that I was working on, because this was actually the third time in a row that I had been fired from my job.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I actually don't see this as a failure. I actually
Yeah.
see this as part of my progression because, funnily enough, despite the fact that I got fired every time, I always made a career step up in terms of my career progression. So, I went from middle management to management team. But actually, when I got fired from the last job, which was for a big publishing company, I was actually really glad because it would not only save me a lot of travel time, because I had to travel almost an hour and a half to work there and then another hour and a half back every day. So it was like a lot of time spent just sitting around on public transport without really being productive, and it didn't really feel like I had a career path in this company. So I was ready to make my own career path, and I was actually quite happy that this opportunity came about at that moment because it kind of forced me to take this step.
Wow. So third time is a charm.
Yeah, 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 for sure. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a job, you know.
Yeah,
I mean, I think in this day and age, I don't think we plan to be in one company for the rest of our lives. You know, there
absolutely.
are people who are pursuing a career within one business, you know, for a long time. I have some friends from university who graduated with me 20 years ago, and they're still working at the same company that first employed them. And I think, wow, that's that's great, you know, good for you. But it's not how I see most people in my circle of friends. Most people are hopping from job to job, and I think that's also what companies kind of come to expect these days. But of course, when you're doing that, you're also constantly changing, like, environments and colleagues and processes and systems. So it takes a lot of time to get used to how things work when you're changing jobs regularly. You know, if you have the opportunity to do your own thing, and you can create your own environment and your own workplace with your own processes and the way you like to do things, and and you have success, you know, I think that's really
Yeah,
the ideal scenario for anybody.
absolutely. It feels great like to relate on this. I quit my job like 2 years ago to do this, what I'm doing right now.
Fantastic, congratulations.
I'm sure like the first year when you took the decision, initially you have created a sort of data pool of the people, of the coffee roasters that you want to work with. How was like the first year of Coffee Wine?
I would say it was a bit mixed. The good thing was that because I had already created so much content for the blog where I wrote about all these cafes, and I had created connections with cafe owners, with roasters, and we were all kind of starting out, you know. It was the beginning of the third wave in many places. You know, there were, at the time when I started this in Amsterdam, a handful of cafes at best, and only 2 or 3 specialty coffee roasters, you know. And I knew all of them, of course, because I was spending a lot of time there and working with them, you know, doing these tours, etc. But also in other cities, you know, in London, I had a lot of connections. In Berlin, I had a lot of connections. I made connections in Paris. I made connections in Spain. So I felt like I was basically, the first year and a half or whatever, I was basically just building a network, because I needed to tell people who I was. You know, I
Right.
was coming out of nowhere with this business and this blog, and you know, I needed people to trust me enough to give me their coffee at a really good price, so I could then effectively resell it, which is not which is not how I present the Coffee Vine. It's not a web shop where you know, where we are like a marketplace. It's more like we're offering these roasters a marketing campaign effectively, because we have a global network of, you know, by now hundreds of customers around the world. And the idea was at the time already, and this has not changed, that we would basically help these roasters reach new customers by sharing their coffees with our customer base. And initially, it was a little bit more complicated, because we decided, and I say we because I had a friend who was helping me out quite a bit at the beginning, and we were actually working from her house, my friend Erica. We started the Coffee Vine in her kitchen, basically. You know, it was kind of a company that started there, and we were even packing all the coffee boxes in her living room. So that was quite, you know, sort of the typical startup story, if you like. But, you know, in the beginning, it was kind of just an exercise in trying to establish a brand. And then we suddenly, you know, started getting quite a lot of traction. Not all the roasters were equally enthusiastic about working with us, because we, at the time, were repacking the coffees into our own bags. So a lot of roasters were saying, oh, you know, like, this is going to impact the freshness, and what about our branding, and like, you know, this and that. So that was the first iteration of the Coffee Vine. We then decided to open a brew bar, which was quite a strange experience. I was basically, at the time when I was starting the Coffee Vine, I was managing a Lot 61 cafe in Amsterdam. And this lady came in one day and she said, hi, you know, I came to one of your coffee tours some months ago, and I really loved what you're doing. Me and some other people are opening a small food court kind of situation in Amsterdam. And she didn't immediately disclose where or who or what. But she said, can you, or would you be interested in, you know, having your own coffee bar? And of course, I loved that idea, because I thought, amazing, you know, this is what I've always wanted, and this sounds really interesting. And then eventually she shared with me where it was. It was in the main theater building in Amsterdam, on one of the main squares. But unfortunately, the space itself was, as it turned out later, really not suitable at all, because it didn't have any seating. There was no Wi-Fi. We didn't have a terrace, even though there was a huge terrace outside, but it belonged to all the other bars. We couldn't put any like signs on the road to tell people, you know, like, hey, we're here. And the other people that we ended up doing this with for a short time were completely inadequate and completely unprofessional, and it just ended up being a gigantic source of conflict.
Oh, damn.
But the good thing is that effectively it was the first European filter-only coffee bar for a time, and we even got quite a bit of media coverage at the time, which was cool, but it didn't last. And that was also around the time when Erica and I realized that the business model itself wasn't really working. So we ended up leaving this space, and we ended up pausing all the subscriptions that we had. And we had to go back to the drawing board to redesign the whole subscription and the product and the boxes and change our pricing, because we weren't making money and this was not sustainable.
What year was that?
This was in 2016.
Okay.
And we basically relaunched the subscription with 3 roasters that we really wanted to have in this edition, who had previously said no. And because we made all these changes, they were then happy to go ahead with a partnership. And one of them was, Coffee Collective, for example. And we were very proud of that because, it felt like we had made the right choice. Since then, the coffee vine has gone from strength to strength.
Wow, that's amazing. Let's deep dive in understanding the process of yours. Like, how do you pick up the roasters, and how do you finalize the coffees, and then how do you make sure these are the specific lots I'm going to work with, since you have like 3 different categories for Europe and for Asia, and gem is also there. So how do you make this work?
The coffee vine initially started with 3 European roasters every month, and this is still something we do today. So every month we have 3 European roasters that we work with, and they're basically like our bread and butter. They are the roasters from who we order the most coffee. Then in 2022, we launched the gems, which is like our limited edition micro lots that we do every other month. This is basically competition level coffees, limited editions, very rare lots that are roasted typically by small boutique roasteries that don't have big capacities, that are quite small. Then we added the global roasters in 2023, which is an additional selection of roasters from around the world, because we noticed, whenever I say we, I'm always talking about me and my multiple personalities, of course. But now it is actually we, because since last year I have the wonderful Kyron Lobo who works with me and is basically like my right-hand man in this business. So I'm going to refer to as we. Historically seen, it's always me and my multiple personalities, but today it is myself and Kyron. But basically what I noticed at the time was that there was quite a lot of growing interest in coffees roasted by non-European roasters, because there was a period, and you have this, it kind of comes in waves, when certain roasters are everywhere.
Yeah.
And no matter where you go, whether you're in Poland or you're in Spain or you're in Sweden or you're in the UK or in Greece, wherever you go, you see the same roasters on the shelves. And even though the coffee vine has always been about finding and sourcing coffees from roasters that are maybe not so well known or up and coming, or from a country where people don't even know that there is specialty coffee, we always try to keep it really interesting by mixing things up. But I also saw that there was a growing interest in roasters from outside of Europe. And there are certain cafes that were kind of leading the way. And I'm thinking about places like Roslin or Motors in Paris, or places like this that were kind of pioneering this idea of like, hey, we don't want to just work with European roasters. We're going to bring in someone from Australia or from Japan or, Mexico, or whatever it is. So that was the third category that we launched. And then the last category that we introduced 2 years ago was the decaf, because there was, again, an additional or growing interest in getting more decaf lots. And we didn't want to put them in the regular subscription because that's not what people are subscribed to. So we wanted to offer that as an additional category. And again, this was quite an interesting exercise because, as you might know, a couple of years ago, decaf was this sort of embarrassing drink that you only ordered if you were pregnant or you had a heart condition. And now it's like, wow, there is so much going on in the decaf space. It's really incredible, like the coffees that we've had the chance to work with over the years.
Yeah.
Have been really outstanding.
People were really questioning the choices of somebody who's picking decaf.
But I think that's really changing, you know,
Yeah.
and I think that's also driven by the
Yes.
fact that decaf is becoming so much more prominent, not just in terms of, you know, there is more decaf around, but it's also roasters have decaf. You know, every roaster nowadays has a good decaf in their program, but there are also cafes that are really putting them kind of at the top of the menu, you
Yes.
know, and that's really exciting. To go back to your question, I know there was a little bit of a detour to get there, but the way we work is we have a long list of roasters that we want to work with already. You know, we have a planning that goes right now all the way to the end of the year. And this is because we have roasters that we want to work with that are new, that we are very excited about, that we've, you know, come across, met at festivals, or that we, you know, we've had on our list for a long time. We have repeat roasters that we want to work with again and again. You know, there are people like The Barn in Berlin that has been, you know, one of our longest running partners and the roaster that has been featured the most. You know, people like Habe, we have people, you know, like Nomad, you know, and so on that we love to work with, that are really old-time friends. And of course, there is a lot of people who write to us, who want to work with us, who are just interested in collaborating with a coffee subscription, and usually they come to us. Sometimes we get 3 requests a day, and it's just, you know, it's impossible to accommodate all of these people because we don't have that many available slots, and we have to find a nice balance. So sometimes we say, hey, this works out really well because we're looking for somebody right now, or maybe we can put you in one of our selections in a few months, or it's just not a match. You know, that also happens quite a lot. So when we get these, you know, editions finalized, we say, okay, these are the 6-7 roasters that we're going to work with for this month. We send them an email. We say, hey, it's time for you to send some samples. They send us some coffees for us to cup during our monthly cupping events. For example, we had one here in Barcelona last month, middle of March, where we had a public event that we did together with Barcelona Coffee Week, and we basically invited a bunch of people to come along and cup coffees with us. Kyron was also here.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was just really fun because these are the kind of public-facing events that I love to do because we don't have a shop, you know, we don't have a physical location. So these are kind of the only times when we can meet a lot of customers or coffee lovers in one place at one time. And once we have picked the coffees, then the next step is just to confirm the roasters and say, this is the coffee that we picked. And please reserve X amount of quantity or X amount of kilos for this feature. Take all the photos and videos. Every 16th of the month, we launch this new edition, and then people can order and pre-order, subscribe, whatever.
Nice. I'll just stretch a bit more on the decaf point. Now that you have explained the process, the positioning is a bit different these days. Earlier, the people used to prefer decaf for those only who do not want the caffeine, but now some of the decaf like I have ordered in your box are amazing.
Yeah.
Now I feel it may be my perspective, but you are a better expert in terms of analysis. Is the perspective changing in terms of people ordering decaf for the taste or for the flavors, or just to want something not non-caffeine?
I think it's just maybe a bit of a health trend, you could say, almost. You know, it's a little bit the same as with alcohol. You know, I've been sober for 5 years, so I don't drink alcohol anymore. And obviously that has forced me to explore other options, you know. And when I started this, you know, this was a time when, for instance, in the Netherlands, there was a bit of an like an explosion of really high quality craft beers that were non-alcoholic, and this offered a really great opportunity to do this, or to maintain this sobriety without even thinking about it very much, you know. So and I think it's the same with decaf. I think a lot of people are becoming a little bit more health conscious. There are people who are maybe a little bit more sensitive to caffeine, or they just want to have a really good cup of coffee at the end of the day, but they don't want to have the caffeine that comes with it. But also there are people who just, you know, enjoy exploring different kinds of coffees that are out there. So I think in terms of the decaf, you know, there have been 2 developments. On the one hand, you have the producers that are making exceptional decafs or low calves. And then you have the customer that is actually actively looking for this because they have realized that decaf has become so good
Yeah.
that you could drink a cup of decaf and you could be fooled to think that it's a regular coffee, you know?
Yeah, some of the Colombian decafs are insanely amazing.
Yeah.
Since you are the founder of Coffee Wine, you have been working with 300 plus coffee roasters and tasted a lot of coffees. What's your palate like?
I think my palate has kind of become a little bit more mature, I would say. There is still like a part of me that is quite playful when it comes to coffees. But I'm, for example, not a huge fan of these co-ferments that are, very popular at the moment in certain circles. I'm also not a big fan of these very extremely fermented coffees, because I think that sometimes it's just too much. It's completely taking away the terroir. It's taking away the original inherent qualities of the bean. So that some coffees that I've tasted, it's actually like you don't even really know where it could be from anywhere.
Yeah.
It could be, Costa Rican, it could be Brazilian, it could be Indonesian. Because of these extreme fermentations, it's almost impossible to know where the coffee is originally from. And I think in specialty coffee, one great like element of the exploration and the discovery part of being in this industry is also the fact that you want to understand what makes a certain terroir so unique from another. By sort of going back a little bit to more naturals and washed and honeys, I'm able to really develop my palate to a degree that I can often, identify the origin and sometimes the region already, like a sommelier almost. And that's not really possible with these extreme coffees. But I do have to say that sometimes it's just fun to drink a coffee like that, because at the end of the day, it is also part of the industry. And it's also a way of expressing creativity on the side of the producer. Like they can come up with all sorts of crazy cocktails almost, if you like. Doesn't always work in the cup, but it is definitely interesting. So that's also why, when we do pick a co-ferment, it's very rare. It's like maybe once a year. We had one last year from a Polish roaster called Foundation, and it was co-fermented with coconut and lemon. The coffee was so surprisingly tasty because it just had this very sweet and mellow, but also like very pronounced cup profile of like a pina colada, which is not necessarily something you would expect in coffee. And I really loved just the opportunity to present a coffee like this, because at the end of the day, it is something that is really fun to drink. It's not your everyday kind of coffee for sure. But it's definitely interesting to keep an open mind and see what is going on out there, because yeah, at the end of the day, if you're in this industry and you are subscribed to the Coffee Vine, you also want to discover what is out there and not just drink the same coffee every day, because then you could as well just get it from a supermarket, you know what I mean? Or just get a subscription from a roaster that will always send you a washed Colombia, but that's not what we do.
That's what I've seen, like the co-ferments, infused coffees. When I was in World of Coffee Dubai, I was seeing a lot of co-ferments and infused coffees on the table. People preferring that. So I mean, it's a personal choice again, but
Definitely personal choice.
it makes it difficult for you to decide which coffee is coming from where. If one coffee is co-fermented and also infused with something, and then it tastes like cake, so you don't know where this cake is coming from and what has been mixed in these cakes to make it taste like cake. So that's kind of a dubious approach, I feel.
The thing is, there is also a counter argument, of course, where you say, well, if you're a coffee producer in Guatemala and your coffee scores maybe an 82 or an 83, and you want to give it a little bit of a bump, that's what happens quite often, is that they would take this coffee that is relatively average and then just employ a funky fermentation, like an anaerobic process or thermal shock or whatever it is. Like there are so many different things these days that are being employed. If it's done well, it's almost like you're taking a basic product and you're giving it a little bit of a additional touch up that makes the coffee automatically much more high quality. So, for the producer, this is a great opportunity to fetch more money for their coffee, which they would otherwise have to sell for a lower price. So from that perspective, I do think that these kind of more creative and inventive processing methods and things like that can be useful for a producer, because at the end of the day, we all want that they get paid better, but I don't always think that these coffees are tasty.
Now that we're talking about consumption patterns and what people are preferring, consumption is growing like at an immense pace since last 3 years. And if you have to number the countries that you have been working with, what is that number?
In terms of consumers or customers, we're shipping to an average of 45 to 50 countries a month. And yeah, you're right. I think the biggest boom probably came during COVID. People didn't have anything to do, and cafes were some of the only places that were allowed to operate. You could go and get takeaway coffee, but also people were really experimenting with home brewing. So that's also when we saw a huge spike in our subscribers. But I think generally speaking, there is just a growing global interest in specialty coffee. And I think this is really spilling over into every territory that you can think of.
Absolutely.
And just to give you an example, like we had a collective, like the one that you're a part of in Delhi, in Greenland, until very recently, which is a very remote territory with only a couple of thousand people living there. But there was a community there that ordered our coffees. Unfortunately, the person who was running this collective decided to stop. But we had a community in Greenland, like drinking our coffees. It's crazy, And then, for example, a few weeks ago, I went skiing with my sister in a small country called Andorra, which is between Spain and France in the Pyrenees. And it's great for winter sport. And I was there 3 years ago and I could not find a single specialty coffee bar. And then I went back this year and there were 6,
Wow.
And you can see that specialty coffee has trickled down almost into every place on the planet. And it's, on the one hand, it's the fact that there is just so much interest globally, but also there are people who have lived in places with, great specialty coffee, which is actually how a lot of the European roasteries and cafes started. A lot of the early adopters here had come back from Australia and New Zealand, where they were traveling or working, discovered specialty coffee there, and then decided to set up a specialty coffee cafe or roastery in Europe. I can guarantee like almost 8 out of 10 founder stories of the original roasteries and original cafes were kind of something like in this direction. They were in Australia doing a working holiday, working in a cafe. They came back to Europe and decided to start a roastery, and that's kind of how it began. And that's basically now happening also with people who are maybe from other countries, who lived in Europe and worked in specialty coffee cafes, and then go back to their original home countries and set up a roastery, a cafe there. So it's kind of like, this kind of global movement of specialty coffee professionals who are moving around the world and setting up businesses. And I think it's really exciting because I've had the chance to drink specialty coffee in the most unusual places, and it's been great, even in Barbados.
Nice. Before COVID, people used to get the information from cafes, like what all the new coffees are coming up. And after COVID, these micro communities that have started developing in multiple places are kind of preaching the word that this is good coffee, this is bad coffee, and this is where you can come and have all the coffee. That's really amazing. I see in every country and most of the places. Specifically, India, we have seen amazing blast of communities and these gatherings, community events, Delhi Coffee Community, Mumbai Coffee Community, Bangalore Coffee Community, then Jaipur Coffee Community. It's like really good. And we have been consuming the coffees, the boxes that you have been distributing in this community since almost 2 years or maybe more than that.
Longer.
Longer than that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it became like, sort of one point that coffee wine is introducing multiple roasters to a place where there is a very less leakage of international coffees. And that's a really great place to be. So how did you crack this and bring coffee wine in India?
Basically, India is an interesting place because it is such a huge market and it is also a coffee producer. Apart from that, it's very hard to find like the multi-roaster cafes that we're so used to in Europe. You know that in India, it is just difficult to get this kind of coffee. And unfortunately, India is a nightmare to deal with in terms of trade. This is just something that has been a huge, huge problem. I mean, I thought Spain was bureaucratic, but I think India really takes the cake, when it comes to bureaucracy. It's just sometimes you don't even know what you're doing, because everyone tells you something different. There are, you need to have 1,000 different papers just to export some coffee, or to import some coffee. Everyone everything is like checked, to the letter, and it's just, it is definitely a challenge to deal with India as a customs territory, but it is such an exciting place because people like you, people like, the communities that we have all over India are just so vibrant, so passionate, I mean, you guys are all amazing people, and it's so incredibly fun to be able to work with you and to see, these coffee community meetups that you're organizing, that are being organized in different cities, and just the interest that is out there in sourcing the coffees that we work with, is really astonishing. I didn't expect it to be like this. I just thought, it'll be like a few orders, whatever, but it's really become, like quite a significant community. And we're really looking at building like physical representations there as well. So that's what I mentioned earlier with the hubs. So this idea of the hubs is basically taking the collective idea one step further. So instead of working with, private individuals who are like running small communities, it's really about finding physical places in different cities that can act as our local representatives. And this is something that we want to do, not just because it will probably make the whole import process smoother, because these places or businesses will have an import license, so they will be able to import unlimited quantities basically, and this will make it a lot smoother in terms of like just avoiding problems with customs, but also because we want to have physical places where people can go and pick up their orders, where we could potentially have our coffees on the shelf for those who did not order on time and still want to get the coffees. But also maybe one day we can also visit and do events there and like really foster a community by being there. I mean, Kyron will be going back regularly to Mumbai, so there's a good chance that he will be able to do an event in Mumbai at our local hub, in the coming months or years. Maybe I'll be back as well, and we can do a little tour of India and visit all of these different communities.
Yeah, that'll be awesome.
Yeah, so there you go. So this is how it kind of started. The other reason why we primarily work with collectives, just to kind of finish on that point, is because we do ship to India via the web. So you can order our coffees via the website and have it shipped to your house, but then primarily it'll be shipped through the post, because that's the cheapest shipping method we offer. So if you just want to get an individual box sent to your address, it'll probably go via the post, but then it is slower and you will have to pay the tax for import and VAT on your end. But the collectives are basically groups of people who order, as a group, and they get all of their coffees shipped to one location with FedEx, and it's always DDP, so we take care of all the import duties and taxes, etc. So it's basically just the coffee arrives and you can pick it up and you can enjoy it, and it's usually pretty quick. And on top of that, of course, India has become more interesting as a specialty coffee producing country. Even though Indian specialty coffees are not widely available outside of India, I think.
Yeah.
And I know a friend who is Polish, and he lived in Canada, still lives in Canada, I believe, Damien, who is a co-owner in a coffee farm I believe in Kerala or somewhere down there. And he invited me to come and visit the coffee farm when they're doing the harvest, but it's usually around the time when I'm in Mexico, so it's not always the best time, but it's definitely something that I'm still very much keen to do one day, and maybe that could be an opportunity to then do a little tour, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the point, like now there are a lot of coffee roasters which are coming up in India, in all of the major cities. There are a lot of coffee estates which are producing really good Robusta and Arabica and Liberica, Excelsa. So this whole processing, growing to roasting boom is kind of is visible slowly from India as well. So is there any consumption patterns that you have seen across the world that you can highlight here, or your learning insight about that?
There are definitely regional differences when it comes to preferences and what kind of coffees people are really after. I think in the Middle East and India, there is definitely a trend at the moment towards more experimental coffees. I think it's what you said earlier about your visit in Dubai, where there are a lot of co-ferments and infused coffees, etc. I don't think that's so popular in Europe anymore. And that's just because I think there was a wave a few years ago when everybody was putting anaerobics and this and that and whatever on their shelves. And it was kind of like a crazy explosion of flavors. I think personally, I don't see as many crazy fermentations anymore as I used to. But I think most roasters, when you go to a cafe, they will have a really solid coffee on espresso, natural or washed, maybe a blend, but you will probably not find something like an anaerobic natural on a espresso grinder, or things like this. And when it comes to the kind of coffees that you see on the filter menu, I think there are definitely more experimental coffees in there. There are more micro lots, there are more roasters now sourcing expensive coffees. Everyone has now like a limited edition line of coffees that are packaged in a certain way that is more premium, because that's also where you make more money. These people, these roasters who are looking for ways to diversify, but also to appeal to other audiences. They're buying more expensive coffees from certain producers, and they're packaging them in beautiful boxes or tubes or bottles or whatever it is. And selling them at a premium price, because they also know that this really appeals to a certain customer. For instance, just to give you an example, I live in Barcelona, and one of my regular coffee places is the original Nomad in Passatge Cert, which is the Nomad where it started, many years ago. And Jordi and Fran, and the whole Nomad teams, they're all friends of mine. And, I've been obviously a big fan of theirs since day one, and we have worked together many times. But when I go there, it's very curious, because when I'm in this cafe, it's usually the largest quantity or the largest amount of people in the cafe are usually Asian tourists. And yeah, so people from China, from Japan, from Korea, like usually Far East tourists. And when they're in this cafe, I'm usually just sitting there sipping on my coffee, and I'm just observing what they're doing, and they're all buying bags of the competition coffees that they have on the shelves. They're not buying the regular washed or the regular naturals or something like that. They're always buying the most expensive coffees on the menu. And I think this is partially because, it is a status symbol to go back and say, oh, look, I have this amazing, Sidra from Nomad that I bought in Barcelona. Or I have this geisha, or I have this, whoosh whoosh or whatever. But I don't always think that these people who are buying these coffees have much idea about how to prepare coffee, or they're not going to follow a very strict principle and have their own mineral concentrates, and they have their Sibarist fast filters and whatever. It's kind of like a status symbol, to have this coffee. And I think that's definitely like a bit of a difference in terms of consumer buying patterns, because in Europe this is not so much a thing. In Europe, people are more conscious about money. They do want to get good quality products, but they're not going to go around buying every single geisha from every single roaster on the planet. It feels more like this is a thing that people do, where it's more about, kind of like showing off, and it's like, the culture is more about like, look at what I've got.
Yeah, in a way, it has, the varietals also have become a status symbol, and in a way some audience are there who love to explore coffee for the coffee it is, instead of just for the labels. I think that's always the real gap between capitalism and between the real connoisseurs.
I mean, I just want to mention a funny story, because the other day I met with a former subscriber of ours, and I'm saying former because he's an amazing, super nice guy from Turkey, who has been a customer of ours for many, many years. And the only reason he is not continuing with his subscription is because Turkey is making it impossible to import coffee products. They're taxing everything. They're levying really high import duties on everything. They're opening every box. It's a little bit like India now. But he said to me that, I met him here in Barcelona at a local coffee roasters cafe, and he told me that he actually buys all of these crazy expensive, micro lots or whatever, and he puts them in his freezer. And he said that he has a dedicated freezer at home that is only for coffee. So when people come and visit him, it's almost like they're going to see somebody who has a really expansive wine cellar. He has his coffees that are like for special moments, coffees for certain people, coffees for, when he feels down or he wants to have a pick me up or, whatever. And it's like, wow, this is really crazy. I mean, it's fantastic, but, I actually said to him, I was like, do you ever drink all of these coffees? Because it sounds to me like you have a lot of coffees in that freezer and you're buying and buying and buying. So I don't know. I mean, maybe in his case, it's also like a little bit of a, he's a collector, and that's cool, and I think it's really funny. But yeah, it's just another example of somebody who's like really buying all of these crazy
That's
coffees.
absolutely fit in the criteria of Ankit as well, the co-founder
Oh
with
yeah.
me in Delhi Coffee Collective. He has a dedicated cellar for the coffee beans and he keep collecting them. For after 1 year also, if you ask him that do you have some geisha left of that batch, he might have some 18 gram or 20 gram in his cellar.
Oh wow.
It was really nice and insightful to learn your experience, your insights, and all the stories that you have shared. You also mentioned about the United Nation of Coffee, that a concept that you want to explore a bit more.
I use it to kind of describe a little bit what the coffee vine is. On the one hand, the coffee vine, of course, is a subscription service. So, we are sourcing coffees from the best roasters from around the world and offering them to customers around the world. I mean, at the end of the day, I want to dedicate more time towards building this community, and by doing things like events, which we did recently. I'm going to go back to Amsterdam next month for the Amsterdam Coffee Festival, and we're going to be actually brewing coffee at the stand of the Guatemalan Coffee Association. We got invited by the Embassy of Guatemala in the Netherlands, and this is again, like proof that our name and that the sort of reputation that we have as a global connector is reaching people in all corners of the world. We will have the opportunity to go to the Guatemala stand at the coffee festival and serve coffee from a former Guatemalan World Barista champion, Raul Rodas, who is going to be featured in our April edition. So, we're trying to really do something quite unique and special and really highlight, the world's finest roasters, and no place in the world is far enough. Like, we can really bring coffees from as far away as New Zealand or Argentina or wherever. We have worked out a really good way of doing this, even though this very unfortunate situation in the Middle East right now is making things a bit more challenging. I would say that we are the kind of only coffee subscription service in the world that has this kind of approach. I know there are others out there that are doing, a lot of great work, and I don't see them necessarily as like, competitors that we need to keep away. I actually am pretty close, or like on very good terms with most other coffee subscription owners, because I think at the end of the day, we're kind of all learning from each other. We're all kind of helping each other in a way, like trying to make this market bigger for everybody. And I think it is just a really interesting, a premise to be able to connect with people all over the world and be able to, yeah, share the same coffees that we send out with people in more than 50 countries. I mean, it's just incredible.
It is incredible, and I wish you add more roasters and explore more, and we get to try more coffee.
More? Oh my gosh. Can you imagine like the logistical nightmare we already have working with 7 roasters a month? I mean, it's just, so much coordination, so much like timing, so much making sure that everything leaves on time, so much like customs and stuff. Like we are already, like compared to what we were doing 5 years ago, we already more than doubled the number of roasters that we're working with every month. And I think right now it's quite enough. We are trying to do a couple new things with the coffee vine this year, where we're trying to, just briefly, we ran a really large annual survey in January where we asked everybody to submit their feedback about how we're doing. And we also use this as a way to collect ideas and suggestions for what we can do next, because of course we're also not wanting to sit still and just rest on our laurels of everything we've achieved so far. No, we want to continue to expand our product offerings, to add new things, to innovate. So there are a couple of really great ideas that came out of this that we're going to be developing in the coming months, and Kyron and I will be doing this together. One of them is, of course, the hub, but also we want to launch new collectives. So if anybody listening to this wonderful podcast in India wants to start their own collective in their own city, let us know. And yeah, at the end of the day, we want to take the coffee vine to the next level, and excited to see what the next 10 years will bring.
Fair. But thank you so much, Alex, for giving your time and sharing about your journey and insights. I hope people find a lot of inspiration
My
and
pleasure.
learnings from this.
Thank you. See you.